Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and welcome back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by Trailtopia. We're on to episode number 68, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this conversation with you. Last week, I told you that I didn't know who our guests were going to be, though I've no idea why I said that because I'd already recorded this interview. Our main interview today is with Damien and Renee Tougas, better known on the AT in 2014, my year, as Toe Salad and Fimby. Somewhat more recognisably, they were part of the Von Trapp family with their children, Padawan, Otter, and the sensationally named Tenacious Bling. Yup, they took on the Appalachian Trail as a family of 5. I remember meeting them and shaking my head at the very thought of it, yet they seemed so together and well disciplined in their approach. As we're going to hear, it wasn't all plain sailing, and I think you'll be really interested in their take on what happened to them that spring, summer and fall. Damien and Renee will be on shortly. But first, I'm feeling a little bit peckish, which is Brit speak for hungry. When I was hiking, I'd wake up to my alarm, deflate my airpad and contemplate my blah breakfast. Every morning I poured water into those different coloured paper bags, scrunch around the ingredients, not one of which had any association with fruits, and then eat that soulless gunk. I then find unhydrated powder and sugar in the crevices of the bag. Trailtopia's blueberry oatmeal is a bit of a novelty because it actually has real blueberries. Who'da thunk? No gunk. It tastes great. The bag design ensures complete hydration and it really sets you up for the day. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. Back on the show after her 1-month break, I'm delighted to welcome back Dr. Lynn. I've missed being shown up as a total ignoramus on medical matters. Lynn always adds to my pitiful knowledge in this regard, so I'm so chuffed that she's back. This week, she's talking about something that personally impacts her hiking, so I hope you stick around to hear her section today. Sadly, Lynn will eventually run out of illnesses, diseases and injuries to terrify you about, so I'm still looking for guests to talk about other shorter trails in that new section I put together. I have a couple recorded to play when the time comes, but I'm always looking for more. If you can talk knowledgeably, even vaguely knowledgeably, about these hidden gems, please email me at steve@mightyblueontheat.com. As usual, at the end of the show, we have my reading of Earl Schaefer's Walking with Spring, the story of the very first Appalachian Trail through hike. Now, let's have a chat with the senior members of the Von Trapp family, Damien and Renee Tougas. Okay, I'd love to introduce the family who I knew as the Von Trapps, and I saw you guys filling your water at a stream, which must have been exhausting for all 5 of you, and then later at Greymore Friary in New York. This is Damien and Renee Tougas, known otherwise as Toe Salad and Fimby. Hi guys, you all seem to be very together on the trail and very self-sufficient. Was it always that way?
Always historically or for the entire length of the trail?
Oh, sorry, yes, I did actually mean on the trail, yeah.
On the trail, I would say not always. As we got to know people and make friends and come to terms with the reality of finishing the hike, we definitely started to rely on working with other people to help, achieve our goal of finishing.
So you didn't do that in the beginning? That's interesting.
No.
Well, it depends on what you mean by self-sufficiency. Like, we had people at the beginning who, when we got off the trail for resupply days, people hosted us in their homes.
Nice.
Because I've been blogging for well over a decade. Even, when we did the trail, which was a few years ago, I've been blogging for many years. And people knew that we were doing this, and they knew of our family and they lived in the area and they wanted to support us. So we had people who, when we got off for resupply, would help us with that, pick us up, drive us to, Damien to the Walmart to buy the food. We slept in people's homes. We had showers and they fed us. So that was really helpful.
Was that a network of friends that you'd built up through your blogging platform then?
Yes.
That's awesome, isn't it? That was fantastic. And so did they offer or did you ask?
Oh, they offered. Although at some point, maybe on the blog, I said, I said, we're doing the Appalachian Trail. We'd love to meet people. And it's not like, I don't think we put out a plea for, would you please host us? People just said, oh, we want to host you. But I mean, also we host people in our home and we open up our home to people also. And I do that even through the blog. So I don't know. It's just kind of a community of that kind of action.
It's certainly that sounds lovely, actually. And so, how many times did you spend off the trail in terms of? Most people spend, say, 20, 30 days off the trail and the rest in the woods. What was your balance like?
Well,
so I mean, I'll just finish before we go. I'll just finish Renee's thing. I mean, most of those places that we stayed were sort of in the southern portions of the trail.
All right.
We had less contact as we moved north, but then as we moved north, we sort of banded together there was a YWAM team on the trail, and they were doing a group trip. And so in the later portions of the trail, we teamed up with them and sort of shared some of their resources. They had a vehicle for doing resupplies and things like that we started to take advantage of. So instead of having these outside people giving us places to stay, we had more of a
family,
a trail family
that
worked together to support each other to reach our destination. So anyways, to answer that question about how many days, we tried to, we eventually sort of stabilized on 1 day out of 7 where we would take a day off. So
that was the second half of the trail.
Yeah.
Early on, it was more like we were getting off the trail every 4 to 5 days.
But we weren't
zeroing.
We weren't zeroing, but we'd be off for 24 hours resupplying.
Right, I see. Okay. No, I mean, that's a nice balance, I think, as well. I think somebody said to me once, you've got to treat this as like a stop in town with 3 or 4 or 5 day adventures between stops in town. And that's certainly how it worked for me and a number of people out on the trail as well.
Yeah.
Now, I know the children aren't there right now, they're asleep, but your trail names were some of the most memorable. I actually mentioned them in my book without even referring to my notes because I remember them so well. And if say Renee, I'd forgotten you were Renee, and I knew that you were Fimby. And there was Toesala Fimby, there was Padawan, Otter, and Tenacious Bling, probably the best name of all time. Tell us about those names and how everybody got their name.
Well, my name came from my blog, which was called Fimby, which was an acronym for Fun in My Backyard.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
For many years, that was the name of my blog. And now I switched my blog name to my own name because my writing has shifted and that kind of thing. But so for years, that was my blog name. So I chose that for myself as a trail name.
Yeah.
And then you can explain your name.
Yeah. So for me, I'm like a big minimalist footwear geek, and I've been for many years. And in the early days, when I was first getting into this, I had a pair of 5 fingers that I wore hiking everywhere. And my oldest daughter, Padawan, coined the term toe salad, which happens when you walk through tall grass wearing 5 fingers and get grass stuck between your toes. It's kind of a greener form of toe jam. So
it's not a great name, is it? Toe salad. I mean,
yeah.
Really.
So that's a name that I kept I never forgot that. And I used it as the name of a minimalist footwear blog I was doing. But
oh, cool.
That's kind of just, it's gone stale in terms of, both the whole landscape for minimalist footwear has kind of changed and I moved on to other things.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
I still like the name a lot. So.
And what about the children? How were the children named?
So, Padawan, our oldest, that is the name of is it a Jedi apprentice?
Yes.
Yes. So, and we're big Star Wars fans, and our oldest daughter is also a geek, and is very much into sci-fi, and is that's just kind of her culture and her interest. And she did the trail at age 15, and it was, well, especially at that age, it was like a journey of
coming of age.
It was a coming of age thing.
I think it's a great age for her to do it. I really do.
Yeah.
And she actually did I don't know how much you are into Star Wars lore, but a Padawan has like a really long braid, like a thin braid from the back of their head.
Yeah.
Kind of to designate that they are, this Jedi in training. And then when they're done, they cut it off. And so when she got to the summit of Katahdin, so she had one of those. She originally had really long hair. When she cut it off for the trail, she left a really long strip.
Oh, that is awesome.
And then at the top of Katahdin, she cut it off. So
She cut it off.
Oh, well, I cut it off, yes.
It was like a whole kind of
Ritual,
ceremony and
yeah.
ritual.
Yeah, that's great.
It's like a coming of age idea. And I mean, I don't think she thought of it so much like maybe at 15, but it suited her interests and her sensibilities. And then our son Otter, he's always loved otters, and he has an otter-like personality.
He's loved animals.
Yes, he loves animals. And he's always kind of identified himself even as an otter in terms of he loves water and fun nice. And they're fun animals. And it just felt like a good fit for him.
Nice.
So he was 13 at the time.
And his trademark was every log book that we encountered, he'd draw a quick sketch of an otter in it.
Oh, did he? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of those. I did see a couple of those. Oh, that's great.
That was his mark in the...
But what about the best name of all?
Yeah,
Tenacious Blee.
That was basically describes our youngest daughter in that she is very tenacious, very determined, very stubborn, which we know about her, and we kind of channeled that and tapped into that in doing the trail because she was 11 at the time. She's also really a very fashion conscious oriented person. She loves
if it's
bling.
Pink or sparkly, she's all over it.
She loves sparkles and pink and bling, and it just was like this perfect combination of kind of her
I think
interest.
she came up with the name too.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Now, I know your children are homeschooled. Did they receive tuition on the trail, or was the trail itself sufficient education for them? Or are there regulations you have to actually adhere to when it comes to education of kids?
So by tuition, you mean like actual education? Because I think
did you actually sit down? Did you actually sit down and have a class when you're on the trail?
No. So education is administered by provinces or states. So it depends on what the regulations is where you live. And for us, it was not a problem to take 6 months off and just go and have a life experience as an education. That's kind of how we educate our kids anyways. We do a lot of life things, and that counts as their education. So yeah, when we were on the trail, we figured that the trail was the education, and it wasn't a problem in terms of meeting the regulations of the province where we live.
Right. Well, I mean, no question, it's an education, and I could think of very few things that I would think would be better education for a child. So why wouldn't you do that? And so, how long were you planning the hike, and did it always include the children? Are you going as a family, or was just one of you going, or was the plan all the time to be taking the children with you?
When you say all the time, at some point it became like we originally envisioned the hike in around 2012. No, I'm just saying like the actual started making plans for it. But I had, we used to live in Maine, and I had sort of become acquainted with the trail there and caught the bug. And at that point, it was just sort of more of this is something I want to do at some point in the future. And then it kind of morphed into this would be cool to do as a family. And, it sort of evolved. But we've done like a lot of hiking and backpacking as a family. So by the time we decided to actually do it, we didn't really think otherwise.
Wow. I think it's a brave thing to do, I must say, for anybody. I had enough trouble keeping myself going, so to actually be managing the entire family, it must have been quite tough.
Like Damien wouldn't have ever done it on his own while we were raising children to be gone like that for 6 months.
Right.
And we have a very together life as a family with homeschooling and working at home and that kind of thing. So it was not something that we ever were considering doing. You were never considering doing on your own.
Yeah.
While we were raising kids.
Right. We just never, I knew it was something at some point I wanted to do. And then eventually.
If became when.
Yeah, exactly.
And we made that decision in March of 2012.
Oh, right. So literally 2 years before. Wow, that's a lot of planning. And that actually leads me to what I'm talking about here. The logistics of this must have been everything must have taken ages, because I saw you at a water source. I'm thinking to myself, it takes me quite a while to fill up 1 litre of water. So how did you make everything work that didn't make the everyday drag? Because there are so many things to do when you're hiking with a group of people.
Oh,
well, it's interesting because yes, there's a lot of things to do, but we had 5 people to share tasks. So,
and the kids really stepped up and did their share, did they?
Yes.
For the most part, they had to walk, and they were happy to get to camp and do something else. Sometimes,
the things you have to do on the
Yes.
trail is, let's start with the late afternoon or evening when you get into camp. You have to set up your tents. You have to get more water. You have to cook. So Toast Salad did all the cooking for our evening meals. And then kids helped set up the tent. They helped get the water. In the morning, they were responsible for taking down tents.
So everybody had their own job. That's great.
Yeah, we all had jobs.
And I think when I thought about it, because I'm actually funny, I'm speaking to a mother taking her 4 children on the trail soon, and she's doing exactly that, allocating. Each child has their own job, and so it becomes part of their routine as well. And so how did they actually adapt to the trail itself, the hiking itself? Because this is not an easy task even for an adult, is it, physically?
No.
Well, and it's not easy for anybody. And each child sort of adapted according to their personality or didn't adapt, depending on how you look at it.
By the way, before you tell us that, you probably haven't read my book, and I wouldn't blame you at all, but I actually mentioned your family, and I actually said something about them all. I wonder whether you mind if I tell you, because I've just brought it up to tell you. I said they were Dad, Toast Salad, Mum Fimby. I said, I described your kids, a calm daughter of about 13, Padawan.
Yeah.
A younger, intense girl, Tenacious Bling, and a cheerful young boy, Otter.
Yes.
Was that okay?
It.
Oh, cool.
That's pretty much exactly it.
That could have gone really badly, couldn't it?
Well, that was really cool. I think that's so interesting how you really did
capture their
personalities. In like one sentence.
That's good. I'm pleased. In that case, I'm particularly delighted about that. So anyway, it is tougher. It is tough, rather. So did they get into it physically pretty quickly?
Yes, I'd say physically the kids didn't really have any, they were able to do it physically, but the youngest tended to complain the most about physical things.
Because it does hurt. I mean, you're sore.
Yes.
She does that in regular life now, even. If in everyday life, if something is physically discomforting, she'll be the one who complains about it, the most.
Or even just not going according to her plan.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Well,
she's
very...
That is the prerogative of every youngest child, so that's okay.
Yeah, perhaps that's just a youngest child
So
thing.
while everybody may have been hurting, as far as we were concerned, she was the one that was hurting the most, right? But she was most vocal about it.
Oh, dear. Now, I know they're not there. I wanted to ask them a question, but did they find it tougher than they imagined? Or did they really find it was a breeze?
Oh, and I'm sure they would say they found it tougher because we've asked them about this, in preparation to talk with you.
Yeah.
And we had no idea. Going in, I mean, we backpacked as a family doing 2 to 4 night trips. We have done a lot of hiking. Our kids have been hiking since they were young children. And we've been, we've backpacked in different inclement weather and rain and snow. And so we thought we were somewhat prepared, and we were prepared, but it was so much harder.
Well, nobody's ever prepared for the duress of the hiking, which ends up being mental, really, more than, physical, yes, but ultimately it becomes a mental game.
Yeah, because a 3 or 4 day trip, that's almost a vacation, isn't it? But when you're actually literally living on the trail for a long period of time, and the way in which I guess I'd equate the two would be, I used to have a holiday home down here in Florida. I'd fly down from New York. Now I live here. People still regard where I live as a holiday place. It's not. It's where I live. It's my home. So it's an entirely different mindset, and it is on the trail as well, as opposed to going for a weekend hike or even a day hike. You go out and spend your life. You literally live in the woods. That's an entirely different mindset, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and so it was very challenging for us as a family to adapt to, and also to accommodate, well, as much as we could, everyone's unique needs in responding to that, because we all responded to those challenges differently. There's 5 of us.
Yeah.
And we processed that differently. And
there was always somebody who was off at some point. You'd never have everybody. So every day was hard for somebody else. And so for the parents, that is hard because,
of course,
it's either you or one of the kids.
So, so are there memories of the children's memory? I hate to call them children because I know, and now, for example, Padawan's 18 or 19, I guess, isn't she?
Yeah,
so she's not a child anymore. So I apologise, Padawan. But what were their main memories of the trail? And you said you'd spoken to them, so I wonder if they have main memories. Are they good or bad?
I think, everybody remembers people. That's like the sort of the strongest memory that you would say, that is the best thing as well. Which is part of the reason why we chose the AT in the first place to do this. Because I was kind of actually more interested in the PCT from a landscape and beauty standpoint, but the AT was very social, and we felt that would be really important for the children, especially for motivation and to make the experience more interesting for them.
Yeah. And so when we talk about our memories of the trail, and especially when we meet new people and we're getting to know each other and we share that part of our history with them, the kids, they'll talk about the people that we met. And when we watch, we did a video series while we were on the trail, and when we watch those things, and we will get very nostalgic for the people and the friendships that we had. And I would say that's the predominant memory we have, and which is a good one, because we had friends, and there was that anticipation you feel on the trail, are we going to see our friends down the trail? Are we going to and then the joy of when you do meet up with people again, and so those things are I would say pretty significant in our memories.
But it was, for Tenacious Bling, it was very difficult for her after the first month. The first month was okay, but then it just became a real trial for her for most of the rest. And so for her, she's still, I don't know why I want to say scarred, but
she's still processing.
Yeah, she is. And
that's interesting. Well, she's at an age now, she's say 13 now, so that must be
15 now.
She's 15 now. She was 11. She just turned 15.
Oh, right. Wow.
And I should add, I don't know if you're getting to this later, or if you knew this, but I injured myself. I had a stress fracture.
That was my next question. And because we were supposed to record several months ago, weren't we? About 6 months ago. And I've looked at what I wanted to talk about. And I know I saw some of your films online, and I know that one of you left. I wasn't sure. It was actually you, was it then, Fimby?
Yeah. So I had a stress fracture that was, I think the injury happened probably somewhere in Connecticut, but it was diagnosed in Vermont. Wow. And I got off the trail, which was very disappointing. That was one of the hardest things.
Yeah, I remember the film. It was very emotional, wasn't it? I remember
very hard, because I had done all this work, and to then not be able to finish with my family. So what I did at that point was I went and got our vehicle with some friends' help. We had our vehicle in Maine. And so then I supported my family through the Whites and through Maine. So that was really helpful for them. But what was interesting about that is when I was off the trail, at that point, any kid who didn't want to finish could get off with me. I was off, any kid who didn't want to finish was they could have gotten off with me, but nobody did. I
remember that. And I know they were quite emotional as well, weren't they?
Yeah. And it was really hard on our youngest daughter.
Tenacious Bling
was... I was about to say, yes.
Her tenacity really came out there because she became really stubborn. She was not happy by the end with all the physical and boredom and all the things that happen with trail life as gets difficult. But at the same time, she knew she could 100% stop if she wanted, but she would not. She wanted.
Did you ask her if she wanted to? Did you say if you want to get off?
The option.
We said you can get off now. Like before that, we were all doing it as a family, and we did everything we could to make it as it was like something we were doing as a family. We knew that our kids were physically capable of it. They weren't getting injured. We were providing for all their needs. We were feeding them well, feeding them a lot of food. And so we felt they were well taken care of, but we're doing this as a family. And yeah, it's hard, but and people had different responses to that. Like our oldest two, our son, he's just so happy-go-lucky in general. He
was happy the whole way.
Pretty much happy the way. The hardest part for him was that some people weren't having a good time. Like, that was hard for him. But he was like, he was happy.
Yeah. Did you think that the overall? I remember seeing that. I didn't see all of your video series. I saw quite a hell of a lot of them, in fact, because you released them free over a period of time, didn't you? And so I was catching up every now and then. Do you think that it strengthened or tested your familial bonds?
Yes, both. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I guess it would be both, wouldn't it? Really, yeah.
It tested them, and then I do think it strengthened them. It didn't tear us apart.
Because you're still there.
Yeah, we're still here, and I would say that it's interesting because my relationship between myself and Tenacious Bling, I would say, was strained on the trail because we both approach things very differently. I'm a very, I'm a glass half full person, and she's a glass half empty kind of approach.
And in her defense, I am too.
I'm not.
I'm just saying, we don't want to Tenacious Bling. No,
but I'm talking about my relationship with her.
Yeah.
And so that as we went on, our relationship, I felt, got strained, and it was even a bit strained for some time after we got off the trail.
How interesting.
But I feel like it's over the last few years, it's gotten really good. Like, I feel like it's the best it's ever been, in so many ways.
I think this is such a transforming thing anyway, and nearly all of my episodes at some point talk about the transformations. Have you noticed impacts upon the children that you can directly point to their experience on the trail?
Yes.
Well, the problem is I would almost have to see what it looked like in both cases.
Yeah, we don't know control, right? So we don't.
Yeah, I do understand. I do understand that, but there are sometimes things that people can point back to. That person became a slightly different person for what happened in a situation, and the trail, I know, has definitely impacted a lot of people I've spoken to.
Yeah.
Mostly in positive ways, but certainly straight after the trail, this it's almost like PTSD without getting shot. A number of people seem to get depression after the trail. And I wondered if it happened to the children or things.
Well, we're talking a lot about the kids, but I myself struggled a lot on the trail. I don't want to leave that out.
Yeah.
I had a very difficult time. I had depression on the trail.
Oh wow.
And recovering from that after we got off the trail was I didn't experience the letdown of when we got off, but it was like a year-long recovery after the trail.
Wow.
It was, I'm not like the poster child for like, oh yeah, you should do a thru hike. It was very difficult, but I don't regret it. I don't, I feel like it formed things in our family, and
Well, you learned a lot about yourself.
I learned a lot about myself that I didn't know before. Just things that, and in our relationship, in my relationship with Toe Salad, with Damien, things came to the surface that we didn't know existed, and that was very hard.
Is that because you had time on the trail to talk to each other more or not?
No, it was because we were put in a situation that was like under duress. It was the stress.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I kind of get that. So that actually was going to be my next question. And it really was related to when you returned. What do you think all of you learned about each other?
Well, I think what we learned about each other, I think in a situation like that, you learn a lot more about who you truly are in certain ways, because ultimately our personalities really, are amplified, I'd say, under duress. and it kind of really solidified better understanding of each other.
Yeah.
So
that in our relationship, we know things about each other. I know things about toe salad and Padawan, tenacious bling, and otter that I guess I probably had a sense of before, but you see each other in this. It's very beautiful. There's a lot of wonderful things that happen, but you also go through a lot of grueling things together. And so you find out things about each other that maybe aren't apparent when you're at home and you're not under that kind of intense, like it's an intensity. It's like a pressure cooker of sorts, but you know, but
it's learning through adversity, isn't it?
Exactly.
We all learn through adversity. And you know what? I don't think any of that can possibly be wrong. You know, maybe you want to hide certain things about yourself, but you're really stripped bare when you get on the trail, aren't you?
Yes, exactly. That's what it was. And I felt that way keenly. And I had that language for it also. I don't think the children would have expressed it that way, but I felt like I had been laid bare, I was raw. And it's really interesting to share that experience as a family and with your children.
I bet.
And process that together. So I think in that way, I mean, we're a very close family, but I mean, we know things about each other, and we've had to be honest about who we are, and we still love each other. And so we're in this relationship in which we're like, I know this about you, and I still love you. I'm on your team. I'm going to help you. I know this. We know things now about our kids that help us in helping them as young adults. And we might have known those anyways, but you're like, oh, I know this about you. This is gonna be a challenging thing for you here, and we're gonna try to help you as much as we can. But there's ultimately this okay, yeah, I know this kind of junk about you.
Yeah, well, you know what? Funny enough, when you listen to this back, you're going to hear yourself, and you're going to hear that when you said we still love each other, but there was a but there that was actually unsaid. But it was clearly there. So you know what? That's some things. So people going out with other people, their friends, their family, you know, they've got to be prepared for knowing stuff, which is I can't see any downside of that personally.
Well, I mean, they say something like the worst thing a couple can do is hang wallpaper together. You know,
I think
I agree with that. I agree with that.
We upped that.
We upped that.
A bit more wallpaper. So, as a family, was there a best moment and was there a worst moment? I guess worst moment is you leaving the trail then,
I think
Renee.
that was the worst moment, me leaving the trail. Oh, there was so many good moments. It's funny talking to you like this. It sounds like it was all hard, but it wasn't.
No, of course not. Of course.
So many good moments.
Mostly that there's just the highs are very high and the lows are very low, but there's not a whole lot in between.
That's interesting. I think I found there was a lot of in between actually. Funnily enough, you know, not the day-to-day humdrum. I didn't find it boring, but it was your job was to walk 15 miles in a day or 10 miles or whatever the miles were.
Our experience is different because of the fact that maybe we did it differently. I was sort of spearheading the trip and managing the family on the trail. I was 100% on all the time.
Of course, yeah.
And that is the most difficult thing I ever did. So I don't know.
Because you weren't just responsible for your own well-being,
right,
but for the well-being of your family.
So
absolutely.
I would take on certain. So I don't know. There wasn't very much a dull moment from the perspective of. I mean, yes, it was boring sometimes, but I was always having to deal with something.
Somebody's physical thing, somebody's emotional thing.
Yeah, physical, emotional, whatever. There was just always something going on, and usually the buck stopped at me and some or another, and I had to.
That's what being called dad is all about.
Cake or something that was rubbing raw or whatever, you name it. So
it became your problem.
Yep.
Yeah. So did you get back for Katahdin then, Fimby?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So that must have been pretty special, summiting Katahdin as a family.
I did. We summited as a family, and that was my goal. Was I took it really easy once I got off. I think I was off for about 5 weeks,
right,
and then with the plan to summit with them, and so that was really special.
And then we had car support.
Yeah, well, you guys had car support.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That is nice. That is nice. Yeah. Now you got off the trail. You go back, and I know you were a software developer, Damien. Tell us about Outside Ways, which I've really just started to look into, as you know, and your videos, because they were a series that you released bit by bit. But I know you at one stage that you was charging for them, but then you didn't. I wasn't sure how that worked out. But Outside Ways is another thing you're developing, isn't it?
Yes. So I'll start with the video series. The video series is actually what enabled us to accomplish to get out on the trail in the first place.
All right.
I mean, it's not cheap to take 6 months off and, survive on the trail without any form of income. And as a family, that sort of becomes even much more of an issue. So we thought of a creative way to attempt to help finance it. So we decided to do a video series as we went of the trail, and sell whatever we could along with that. So we partnered with a friend of ours who lived in Maine as a video editor, and we launched a Kickstarter campaign to raise money for the video series, which was very successful. And we even sold some subscriptions after the fact as well. Cool. So basically we launched videos as we went. There was maybe a 1 month lag or so. And so that whole endeavor was what enabled us to fund our
part
trip.
of what helped fund it.
Well, a very significant part.
Please forgive me if I've got this wrong, but I haven't looked at them for some time now. But I remember you're all lined up as a family as the intro, and it's a kind of neat little thing. You all walk off. One person's left behind. I was going to guess it was Tenacious Bling. It was,
yes,
it
but
was
you know
exactly.
what? We didn't plan any of that.
Yeah, it had to be though, didn't it?
Doing this at my parents' house, we were shooting that, and it was like, okay, we're going to try to shoot this intro, and then it was like the four of us walk off, and she stays there, and we had no plan. She's like, I didn't know I was supposed to walk.
I love that. I just love that. You fall in love with the kid when they do that sort of stuff. It was awesome. It was awesome.
Yeah.
So anyway, tell us about Outside Ways then after the videos.
Yeah, so I mean, Outside Ways, I envisioned the beginnings of that while we were on the trail, and then it took me some time to think it through and then actually develop it. My ultimate goal with Outside Ways is to make a really good journaling platform for people who do outdoor adventure.
Sure.
And all forms of outdoor adventure. And so that's what it is, what it's becoming. It's sort of my active pursuit outside of a paying work right now to gradually build that. I've created basically a web platform where people can share their journals of their Pacific Crest Trail, Appalachian through hike, or even weekend things and anything. It doesn't have to be hiking. And I have plans for a smartphone app and a whole bunch of ideas around that. And so what I did was I used our video series as a way to advertise Outside Ways. So that's why I released our video series for free last year.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
A quick ad for Outside Ways at the beginning. So used, we kind of, the video series ran its course in its paid form. So then we decided to turn around and use it as a way to introduce people to Outside Ways.
Cool. Good idea. Now, one last question. And it's this. If you could give one piece of advice to families considering doing this with their children, what would that one piece of, one each, in fact, what would that one piece of advice be, unless it's the same for both of you?
Well, okay. So the interesting thing, I'll just say, the interesting thing about our through hike was that I believe that without our video series, we may have gotten off the trail. Because there was some very difficult things that we encountered, but we felt we had an obligation to our viewers to really keep it going. I mean, I
don't think that's a bad obligation to have. It's another factor to keep going, isn't it?
And so I feel like if I were to recommend one thing for people, and I mean, I remember we read all the books in the beginning, Appalachian Trials and those kinds of things, but that was sort of very clear in a lot of things we read that is basically, if you really want to finish, you have to make sure that you have a good reason and that you're well aware of that reason, so that when the going gets tough, that you can look back on why you're doing this. And, I think Francis Tapon in his Appalachian Trail book said, write down all the reasons why you need to finish this. And Appalachian Trials basically said something similar.
Yes,
the idea
right.
that when the going gets tough, don't lose sight of why you're doing this, because you'll need that. And so for us, that thing was completing our video series.
Was that Dave? Is that David said, know your why? That's such an important thing in everything in life. It only took me 50 episodes of this podcast to know my why for the podcast.
What's your why?
My why is to make people realise how accessible this trail really is. People have all sorts of reasons not for going on the trail. My guests hopefully introduce the fact this can be done by literally anybody if they really want to do it. That's my why, making it accessible. So what would yours be then, Renee?
Oh boy. One piece of advice. I'm not very good with that kind of thing. I think I'll just have to go with toast salads.
By the way, do you ever call him toast salad in personal life?
Well, the thing is, he still uses that like for his Instagram and stuff. So I sometimes will refer to him as toast salad in a social media context.
It's still going to be my trail name for forever. I can't see that going away.
Cool.
For me, like, relationship is really important for me. That it's kind of like one of the driving factors of my life, and it's why I homeschool my kids and all that. And so for me, I think the relationship element, in terms of helping you complete or helping you, whether that's because you have, in our case, we had like relationship on the trail and we are in relationship with each other and we're supporting each other. I guess maybe some people could do this somewhat independently because I don't know, relationship as a key piece for the support and the accountability. We were doing it in relationship with people, but also we had other people helping us along the way, like hosting us in their home at the beginning or the YWAM people near the end. Like, I just think, I don't know that this is a piece of advice. It's just kind of this more like the relationship dynamic of the trail was, I think, the most important piece of it for us.
Yeah, I think a lot of people find that as well. I think they do. Look, it's been, I know we got delayed in doing this, but I'm so glad we did it. This has been very instructive for me, and really, hopefully people take a lot of positives out of this because you did it. At the end of the day, you got from beginning to the end, you did it, which is just awesome. And I really appreciate you giving us the time this morning to talk through it. So thanks very much indeed.
Yeah, well, thank you for talking with us.
Great to talk with you.
Okay, take it easy.
Okay,
bye.
Bye.
What an interesting story they had. They all found it tougher than they had imagined, and a few of their responses reflected some of the tensions that came up on their journey. Renee, in her hesitation at the end, was trying to articulate the way in which relationships can be impacted. I thought her hesitation was a sign of a really thoughtful answer. Yet, despite their various problems, they came through it as a family together. Once again, though, hearing about depression, I wonder if there's a dialogue we can start to make sense of it, or at least have a strategy to prepare for it. Let me know what you think. I also thought it was hilarious that they continue to call each other and refer to their kids by their trail names. Mind you, I totally get it. You'd be surprised how ingrained these names can become. There are a bunch of links in the show notes, and I encourage you all to check out more about this family. Guess who I spoke with this week? Okay, it's not a contest, so I presume you don't know. Anybody who said Jessa, though, gets a gold star. I called her to wish her a happy new year and to see how she was doing. We had a lovely chat. She misses the trail, and though she loves her job as a divorce lawyer, God, she found it hard to be sitting at a desk all day long. She walks 3 miles each way to and from work every day. So that must help. Jessa didn't get depressed, and we chatted about that. I've been forming a bit of a theory over this and suggested that it was because she immediately focused on something else when she returned home. After all, she got home on the Wednesday and started back at work on the Monday after. Having something ready to move on to seems to be a bit of a theme in some of my guests, so I wonder if that's the simple solution. As I said before, I'd love to know what you'll think. If there's sufficient interest, I may open a dialogue on my Mighty Blue Facebook page. As many of you remember, Jessa was very close to her family and is grateful to be back with them, but she misses the trail every single day and she has very fond memories of it. It was great to catch up with her, and I thought you'd like to know how she was doing. Talking to Jessa, this year's version, Bruce Matson, is now down to about 50 days before he heads off. Hope some of you are listening to our show, Returning to Katahdin, every Monday. We've got a bit of an experiment this week with his choice of music for the trail interspersed between his reasons for choosing each track. It's a bit of a crib from a Brit radio show that's been running for over 70 years. It was a lot of fun to do. Now, here's Lynn and her personal story about diabetes. Okay, I'm delighted on the very first day of the year, as it currently is, to welcome back Dr. Lynn. Hi, Lynn, how are you?
I'm great. Happy New Year.
And to you. And we've talked about this one, and Lynn's come back with a kind of personal story, but it's certainly something that would be of interest to anybody who's new to hiking or somebody perhaps who's been hiking a while and develops our subject, which is diabetes. So tell us about the personal side first, Lynn, and then tell us about diabetes.
Yeah, the personal side is that my husband and my daughter both have type 1 diabetes.
Right.
My husband also happens to be an endocrinologist, and that is a doctor who specializes, among other things, in the treatment of diabetes.
Right.
So I am living this every day as someone who has to cook for people with diabetes, who has to take care of people with diabetes, help monitor them. So it really is very personal for me, even though I myself don't have diabetes.
Does it really impinge upon your lifestyle in a big way?
It does not, only because that's the lifestyle we lead.
Right.
My husband and I lead a very active lifestyle. Clearly, we're both hikers. We eat a very healthy diet, mostly because of his diabetes, but it helps with our health in general. And I think we would probably eat the same type of diet if we didn't have diabetes.
Oh, interesting.
I guess one of the big things that it does affect is we have to make sure that when we're hiking or traveling, we have to take the necessary medications, the necessary things like glucose test strips and glucose monitor, and we have to always make sure we have food with us, especially sugary food like orange juice or glucose tablets or some type of hard candy, something like that, in case.
Basically, to keep the blood sugar levels up. Is that
exactly
what that's for? Is it? Okay.
Exactly.
So I know there are different types of diabetes: type 1, type 2. I don't even know how many types there are. Is there a degree of ascending severity?
No, the type 1 is an immune-mediated disease where the cells of the pancreas that create insulin are affected, and they no longer are able to produce insulin.
Right.
So that's why people with type 1 diabetes must be on insulin. People with type 2 diabetes, they produce insulin, but for some reason their insulin or other mechanics are not able to metabolize carbohydrates so that the carbohydrates can be used for fuel in the cells.
Wow. There are just, you're saying there are just two types in, or is that it?
In general, yes.
Right.
The other rare things, like post-pancreatitis, diabetes, all that, that's probably not something for us to discuss at this point. But essentially, there's two types.
Okay, so when people with diabetes hike, what do they have to be aware of particularly?
In particular, if you're hiking, especially if you're going for an all-day hike or a couple of nights backpacking or even a long-distance hike, your activity level is much greater than you would normally be doing on an everyday basis.
Yeah, of course.
When you are much more active, you're burning more calories. We all know that.
Yes.
You're burning also more carbohydrates. So your blood sugar will actually go lower, and you have to actually eat more.
So are you actually exacerbating the problem, or
no?
But you're doing the work that makes things So in other words, do they have to eat more then than the normal person who hikes without diabetes?
No, they don't have to eat more than a normal person without diabetes, but they will have to eat more than what they normally eat.
All right. Okay. So I'm just trying to work my way through it, only because I don't have this clear in my mind what diabetes is. Although I've been warned, I might be on the edge of it because I'm getting heavier and heavier as every day goes by right now, as I can't exercise properly. How do they manage their food intake then when they're hiking?
One of the best ways to manage your food intake to make sure that you're getting enough carbohydrates to keep your blood sugar up is to actually check your blood sugar with a glucose meter on the trail when you start, and then maybe an hour or two into the hike, maybe, once every hour or two. And that way you'll know whether or not your blood sugar is staying in a good range, which is generally in the low hundreds. Okay. Or if it's going below something like 70, then that can get you into trouble where you will need to eat food in order to keep your blood sugar up. And the reason you have to keep your blood sugar up is because if your blood sugar goes too low, your body doesn't have the fuel to function properly. Right. And you could get mental status changes, you could get confusion, you can get incoordination, maybe your speech could be slurred. That type of thing. Those are all symptoms, signs and symptoms of a low blood sugar. That also means that your cells are not actually able to work well, and you need to eat something sugary very quickly.
In general terms, people who have diabetes, either type 1 or type 2, they know they have it in most cases already. So therefore, when they go hiking, most of them are prepared. Have you ever actually seen anybody who had diabetes, knew they did, but they were totally unprepared while they were hiking?
No, I have not. I honestly have not ever hiked with anybody other than my husband and my daughter who have diabetes, and we are always prepared.
Yeah. So really what we're trying to show here then is the people we'll be talking about is really those who either have diabetes and know they have and are concerned about hiking, so therefore they want to start hiking, which is, I presume, a good thing, and those who develop diabetes who are already experienced hikers. How would the new people to hiking cope with their diabetes on the trail then?
So if somebody who has a diagnosis of diabetes who wants to start hiking will approach this just like they would approach starting any type of new activity. They would want to, a lot of it is trial and error. You have to know how your body is going to respond to an increased amount of activity, and then how your body is going to respond to the increased amount of food that you're going to eat. And that's where, again, the blood glucose meter is very important, because it gives you an actual real reading of where you are, and you can then judge whether or not you've hiked too much, or you've eaten too much, or eaten too little. Did your blood sugar go really high, really low? Did you eat, for instance, a kind bar that has a lot of nuts, so it's got fats as well as honey, which is sugar? Yeah. Did that make your blood sugar go too high when you may have just needed to eat, I don't know, an orange or something to maybe maintain your blood sugar properly? So
it's really a matter of trial and error. So anybody who's got it needs to just go out and test and see how it works for them. Is that right?
That's exactly it. They have to go out and test it. And I would seriously say you got to do a couple of day hikes. Right. And test things out. If you're planning on through hiking the Appalachian Trail and you have diabetes, you must do some trial runs ahead of time.
I would
and
think
also engage your doctor, because let your doctor know, especially if you're under the care of an endocrinologist, let your doctor know that you want to do this, and what's the best way to start preparing for it.
So how does it manifest itself? You say you get uncoordinated and you get slow and weak and so on. What happens then? What if somebody sees a person in that state? How should one treat them? How should one react to them?
Okay, this is assuming that the person that you're seeing has diabetes. Oftentimes we'll come across somebody and we don't know if they have diabetes or they have hypothermia or hyperthermia or dehydration. So you just treat for everything. But one of the most important thing you need to do in someone who has diabetes, who has a low blood sugar, is you must get sugary food in them fast.
Right.
Fast meaning within seconds to a minute.
Wow.
Because if their blood sugar goes so low that they pass out, they could actually die. This can kill you within a matter of, minutes to hours. So, but it's also very easily treated.
Right.
And sugary food means something like maple syrup or jam or, on the trail it would be candy. If somebody is conscious and they can put food in their mouth themselves, that's important. But you have to actually be there to do it, because they may not be, their blood sugar may be so low that they can't think for themselves. So you have to do the thinking for them. You have to literally sometimes actually feed them food. Having said that, if you feed them food, especially sugary food, it has to be sugary food. If you feed them, they will respond positively within a matter of maybe about 10 minutes or so. It's a very quick fix. It's a very quick treatment.
What worried me is what you said earlier on, that they can slip away so very, very quickly, and you say you could actually die. So is there a gradual deterioration when they get into that state, or is it a pretty quick deterioration?
No, it's a gradual deterioration, but you need to act very quickly. And if a person is unconscious, clearly they can't take food in, and you don't want to be stuffing food in their mouth, because then they could choke. So that's where what we carry with us all the time is a little tube of glucose gel. Okay. And another thing that people have done is cake frosting. Anybody who's home decorated a cake might remember that there's a tube of cake frosting that you can buy in the bakery aisle of the supermarket, and that's pure sugar.
All right.
But what's good about it also is that you can squirt it in somebody's mouth, like along the side of their mouth, the inside of the cheek, and it just instantly dissolves. So the person doesn't even have to swallow it. It will just dissolve, and it will get into the bloodstream. It's the same thing with the tube of glucose gel, which you can find in the pharmacy near the diabetes supplies. Those you just put in the mouth, and fortunately the person doesn't have to even swallow it, and that will help.
One of the reasons we wanted to talk about this, because we actually got an email from a listener, which I sent on to Lynn, about what to do in the case of if someone in your group has a diabetic emergency. And basically, it's just shovel as much sugary stuff in their face as possible very quickly. Then that's the answer, isn't it?
That's basically the answer. And don't worry about saying, am I doing too much? A high blood sugar will not kill you immediately. If you have high blood sugars for 10 years, then you could get complications from uncontrolled diabetes. But just keep shoveling sugar into the person, even sugar packets. I'm trying to think of what would some people have on the trail. Clearly maple syrup is not something that people are going to have on the trail. Probably not jam, but people might have sugar packets.
Snickers bars.
Snickers bars, yes.
By the
now,
thousand.
That's kind of a little bit of a tough one because it's hard to chew, but anything sugary, Pop-Tart, Tang. A lot of times people will take Tang powdered mix. Just shovel spoonfuls of Tang. Don't even mix it in water. Just shovel spoonfuls of Tang. And that also is something that's very easily dissolved on the tongue, so you don't have to worry about swallowing it.
Yeah.
So don't worry about, am I doing too much? Once they're awake and once they're back to their normal state, then you can stop.
Okay.
Having said that, they could slip back over the course of the next couple of hours back into low blood sugar because, again, this activity is just so intense.
That's right.
So you got to still monitor them. You got to still watch them, and you can tell often if a person doesn't have a glucose meter on them, you can tell often by how they're mentating. If they're firing, back with the questions, you ask them certain questions and they're they've got the answers, then they're good. But if they're kind of slow to respond, or if they're still feeling a little clumsy when they're walking, they still will need to have some sugar in them.
Okay. Now, as I say, we started from the viewpoint that somebody who has diabetes thinks they may not be able to hike. You actually think that hiking is a great way to stay healthy as long as you manage it properly. Is that pretty much sum it up?
Oh, absolutely. Don't ever think that you can't hike if you have diabetes.
Right.
Even people who are type 1 diabetes on insulin pumps, which is a certain type of way that these people regulate their diabetes. My husband has an insulin pump. You can hike. You can hike overnight. You can backpack. You just have to take all your equipment with you. Yeah. You have to make sure that when you change your insulin pump, because this is a pump that has a little needle and a tube that goes directly into the skin, you just have to have really good hygiene. You have to make sure that you wash the area before you change your pump. But people who have insulin pumps are very familiar with how to manage their changing, even in the backcountry.
Okay. Well, as some of you know, Lynn sends me a few notes on this, and I wanted to end really on what her daughter, as she refers to her amazing daughter, what she said when she was first diagnosed at the age of 12, and this is a really mature response. What did she say, Lynn?
She said, "I'm not going to change my life to fit my diabetes. I'm going to change my diabetes to fit my life." Awesome. And she has. Basically, she says, okay, I want to do this, name it. She was a big horseback rider.
Yeah.
She said, okay, what do I have to do with my diabetes so that I can make sure I can ride?
Excellent.
So you can do that too, but you have to do trial and error. You have to experiment, and you have to know what works and what doesn't.
That's great. Well, that's a lovely way to finish it. I think. I don't know anything about diabetes, as I pretty much don't know anything about any illnesses, as I've proven every week you've been on the show. But I think finishing like that, and if somebody has a response to manage their illness, then they can make their life work, and hiking can be certainly part of that life, can't it?
Absolutely, and it's such a wonderful way to be able to stay healthy.
Super. Well, thanks very much for that, Lynn, and great to have you back on the show, and we'll hopefully talk again next week.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Cheers then.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Wasn't that great? Lynn's daughter wasn't going to let her diabetes define her. Good girl. It's great to have Lynn back on the show. Next week, I delve once more into the class of 2014 with J.D. Antonin, or Yak. He'll be on with his wife, Amanda. Yak and Amanda are heading out on the trail in 2018, each with their own mission. He's an interesting guy with a somewhat unhealthy appetite for wedding cake, which I know is a bit rich for me. Believe me though, I've got nothing on Yak. He's a great guy and you'll enjoy their story. As always, thanks to our sponsors, Trailtopia. They stepped up and have really helped get these shows produced, week in, week out. Thanks guys. Last week's episode of Walking with Spring by Earl Schaefer ended rather abruptly in the middle of the chapter. Sorry about that, though you'll quickly catch up today. Earl is in the Blue Ridge Mountains and gets held up by wild strawberries. He also gets in a conversation over the correct pronunciation of Appalachian or Appalachian. See you next week. As long as 6 months at a time, and people thought he was only a woods bum. Actually, he was a government man scouting the park trail system. At Bent Mountain, the trail definitely parted from the parkway, beginning the wide swing around Roanoke. My bed that night was in a woodlot behind a church. Dogs in the vicinity sensed my presence and barked frequently all night long, but no one came to investigate or evict me. A dawn start took me along a ridge and then a long ravine past summer homes to the village of Glenvar. Noticing a small restaurant and being more hungry than usual, I entered and immediately classified the proprietress as Irish and amiable. When I specified onion with my hamburger, she said, "How about tomato?" I replied, "Sure, give it everything." It came rigged like a Dagwood special. The lady laughed at my expression and said, "Well, you said give it everything." At a nearby store, the clerk said the only bread they had was salt rising, which takes a little getting used to. He was right, but the texture and flavour were excellent. He said the trail passed an abandoned cabin near the top of the ridge, but too far away to reach before dark. But a campsite could be found along the stream on the way up, information that proved to be correct. Mosquitoes were troublesome for the first time, meaning that repellent and netting would be necessary from now on. The store clerk was also right about the cabin. It was small, about 4 feet high in the front and sloping to the rear, probably a shepherd's hut. The roof was mostly gone and some of the logs rotting, but the view was wonderful and a sweet water spring was nearby. Marking was bad and I soon went astray, coming on a woods road to a gate and a sign too weathered to read. Assuming it concerned vehicular traffic, I ventured on and came to a group of buildings, spotted what looked like a dwelling, and knocked on the door to ask about the trail. The door immediately flew open, and a small man with a furious expression began to revile me harshly, declaring I had willfully encroached on a wildlife refuge, demanding my name and address, and threatening a lengthy jail term. After a second or two in shock, I tried to explain, but seemed to make no impression. After all this time and effort, it appeared that the long cruise would come to an ignominious end in the local hoosegow. But he finally simmered down and even allowed me to get water from the spring before taking the shortest route out of the sanctuary. Verily, a soft answer turneth away wrath. The map showed the trail crossing Route 311 near Salem, so I followed woods roads in that direction, finally arriving at the town. The post office had no mail. The sporting goods store had repellent but no netting. I finally got some by asking in a department store, getting flimsy black stuff that undoubtedly was stylish. Back at the trail from the road crossing, I came to Catawba Mountain and started up in the twilight, came to a waterfall and bedded down on a flat place just beyond reach of the spray. All night long the waters sang their soothing lullaby. In the years since 1948, most of the Appalachian Trail between Damascus and Roanoke has been changed. Beyond the relocation over White Top and Mount Rogers, the trail turns northeastward and follows the crests of a number of long, high wooded ridges in southwestern Virginia. From one such crest there are views into Burke's Garden, from another into West Virginia. Thus the conflict with the Blue Ridge Parkway was eliminated, but also eliminated were such points of interest as the pinnacles of the Dan. Perhaps in the future an alternate route could be restored to the eastern Blue Ridge from Grandfather Mountain north, even if some stretches had to follow the parkway. Pinnacles of the Dan alone would make it worthwhile, not to mention Grandfather and Mitchell. About 1/4 of the Appalachian Trail is in Virginia, much more than in any other state. Most of it is now in national forest, eliminating the road walking that was so tiresome in the past. At the time of the long cruise, the decision to relocate had already been made, actually before the war, which explains the confusion I encountered. The result was my hit-or-miss passage along the approximate route. From Catawba Mountain north, most of the relocations resulting from the parkway construction had already been made, even though some parts of the scenic highway had not yet been built. The terrain was different, and such a drastic move as the one in southwestern Virginia was not necessary. As in the Shenandoah further north, the trail would cross the tops, while the parkway would swing back and forth through the gaps. This was the only way a foot trail and a highway can share a mountain range with any degree of compatibility. The middle of May is a fine time to be in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, moving north with the spring. On top of Catawba Mountain, I came to a large cherry tree on which was a "Prevent Forest Fires, It Pays" sign. Just then a half-grown woodchuck scrambled up the backside and perched in the fork long enough to be photographed. On the far side of the mountain, another chuck whistled as I passed an abandoned house. Its burrow was under the foundation. This farm had been a beauty spot, with flower beds and trellises everywhere. Now, wild flowers and weeds were competing with remnants of cultivated species and rows of neglected berry bushes. The wilderness was taking over. Against a bank were ripe wild strawberries, the first ones on the trip. The lure was irresistible. Not even a thicket of greenbriers can stop me as effectively as strawberries. Another rainstorm began as the lone expedition came to a high ridge studded with outcroppings, sometimes forming overhangs. Hiking became a hectic affair of dripping poncho, slippery rocks and sloshy feet. This lasted for several hours to a 4-lane highway at Cloverdale, north of Roanoke. I stopped at the service station and grocery for supplies and to stay out of the wet for a while. A man who stopped for gas stared at me a moment, then declared bluntly, Man, there's nothing in this world will get me into the woods in this weather and into such condition. Where are you going to stay tonight? When told, in the woods somewhere, he shook his head very sadly. That's exactly what happened. At dark, I spotted the top of a logged-out pine, draped the poncho over 2 jutting limbs, and began cutting off other limbs beneath to make room and to provide firewood. It wasn't my best bivouac, but not the worst one either. Pine will burn under such conditions, and smoke discourages mosquitoes. The little black notebook says that supper was spaghetti and biscuits, and that I didn't sleep much. But the rain vanished late, and stars peeked through before disappearing into the dawn. The trail then turned along roads through a residential district. The weather was fine, and my happiness must have been showing. A girl waiting for a bus smiled or laughed, and a few minutes later 2 more did the same. Then a gang of youngsters at a crossroads watched me approach and cheered when I turned the right way. By mid-morning, the expedition came to the parkway, under construction north of Roanoke. A work crew was cutting and filling with bulldozers, power shovels, and a fleet of trucks. I spread my gear to dry on a bank and sewed my boots, which were loosening at the seams. The truckers coming by stared so intently they almost ran off the road. At the head of construction, which was obliterating the trail, I had to circle to get ahead. Toward evening, the parkway appeared again, finished except for black topping. Once a wild turkey crossed ahead. At twilight, I dry camped on top of a knoll, with peaks of otter looming northeastward. Bear Wallow Gap was only a mile further, and I stopped there at a roadside spring to cook breakfast, using a twig fire. I was repacking when a Forest Service truck came up and stopped. Once again I heard, "You must be that lone trail hiker." It was Ranger Jim Luck. He insisted on driving me down a side road to see a mountainside covered with blooming rhododendron. Ranger Jim was very proud of his territory around peaks of otter and persuaded me to go that way, even though the trail had been recently changed to bypass it. Later he walked with me up Sharp Top and pointed out the local curiosities, Turtleback, Needle's Eye and Buzzard's Roost. To the north, across a deep notch, was Flat Top, higher by several feet but less spectacular. The peaks got their name from the stream between, where Indians once trapped otter. According to Cherokee legend, the peaks were in the northernmost part of their range at the time of the Jamestown settlement. In Myths of the Cherokee, James Mooney tells of white men who visited the Indians and wrote accounts for English journals. These twin peaks are said by some to jut higher above valley level than any others in the Appalachian chain. Ranger Luck said he was one of the men flown to Maine to fight the disastrous fire at Bar Harbor the previous year. When one of the crew asked if he had ever been in a plane before, he said yes, figuring the fire tower on Sharp Top was practically the same thing. Suddenly, he interrupted himself to point down to a line of cars slowly ascending a switchback below. He decided this must be a professor from Lynchburg College and his students on a field trip, which proved later to be correct. Meanwhile, the tower man was preparing to leave, this being May the 15th, when the fire season normally ends. He offered me a half a pound of bacon and a small can of beans he still had on hand. I accepted gratefully, being almost out of supplies and knowing the next door was at least 2 days away. He and the ranger waved from the catwalk as I left. On the road below the summit, I met the caravan. The driver of the first car asked if I was trail hiking, then introduced himself as Professor Ruskin S. Freer of Lynchburg College and also president of the Natural Bridge Appalachian Trail Club. He and his students talked with me about an hour, and one of them snapped a picture. After that, the trek resumed, and I came to Apple Orchard Mountain and the relocated trail. The only apple tree was wild and in full bloom. The surrounding valleys were white with dogwood, state flower of Virginia. Dinner was cooked by the fire tower with water from the cistern and consisted of pan bread and the can of beans. My dry camp that night was on the top of another peak, my favourite place to sleep. In the morning, I cooked more pan bread to go with the bacon, then began a forced march to Snowden on the James River, where I hoped to find a store. Rhododendron was in full bloom and laurel was budding, some of it so tall and heavy it might be classed as trees. About noon, I reached a point overlooking the James River and turned down the spur toward the bridge, just below the power dam. People were fishing in the backwater, one a plump individual munching a sandwich. My stomach growled. A car was leaving and I asked about a lift. The driver, D.E. Powell of Bedford, said he actually was headed the other way, but would take me anyhow, adding, "I've never lost out yet by being sociable." Snowdon was mainly one building, in which were the post office, the store, and the residence of the proprietor. The store was enough for me. Only two things are more necessary to life than food: air and water. On the way back, Mr. Powell said I was to send in the rattlers if I ever killed a rattlesnake. My camp that night was by the fire tower on Bluff Mountain, and my supper was substantial. Breakfast was ditto. The trail slanted down to Peddler Dam, where dozens of people were fishing below the spillway. The trail crossed a rickety footbridge that creaked and swayed but delayed its final collapse until some less fortunate or less starved individual attempted to cross. Up the valley were two more fishermen, one of them the nephew of the keeper of the reservoir. No one else seemed to have any luck, but they had caught 2 crappies and a perch. The trail followed the stream above the reservoir and emerged to a region of high pasture with hundreds of grazing cattle. Trail blazes were painted on giant boulders or on cairns of stone. At dark, I reached a steep, heavily timbered slope and made what later was dubbed my guardrail camp. Done by placing a log or pole above 2 trees and levelling the space above, then padding it with duff and leaves. A soon start in the morning, no water, took me to the summit of Rocky Mountain, where I got a picture of parallel ridges, with cloud fog between toward the sunrise. On the far slope was a good spring, where I cooked an oatmeal breakfast, with plenty of raisins and brown sugar. Nearby were many jack-in-the-pulpits. During the day, the trail became so faint that finding it became difficult. It seemed to fade altogether near a large domed rock. Climbing topside to look ahead, I found a depression that held a lake in miniature and a colourful setting of moss and sprouting foliage. In the distance loomed a massive mountain called the Priest, now crossed by the trail. Later, I learnt that this section was being relocated and about 7 miles was still missing. Beyond the rock dome, the path was faint, then faded altogether at a board sign with an arrow chiselled into it pointing northward. The lack of choice was obvious. Start bushwhacking. With compass in hand, I battled through greenbriers and other thickets. Suddenly, I heard a sound, unmistakable even to those who have never heard it before. A rattlesnake was singing, coiled a few feet ahead of where I was about to step. Once again, as with the wildcat in Georgia, something cold poured along my spine. Backing away slowly, on the lookout for others, I cut a long stick before coming back. I do not believe, as some people do, that poisonous snakes, even in the vicinity of a trail, should not be killed. Too many times I have been too close to being bitten. This one was about 3.5 feet long and had 10 rattles and a button. Except for one small copperhead, this was the only poisonous snake seen on the long cruise. The generally cold and rainy weather must have been a factor. 2 more hours of strenuous bushwhacking then brought me to a blacktop road and the A.L. Hatter grocery store. Both he and Mrs. Hatter were enthusiastic about my trip, which meant a session of talking. She even presented me with a large slice of chocolate cake as I was leaving. Since the evening was moonlit, I walked several miles along the road toward the ridge crest before stopping. My supper that night was a large can of spaghetti, another of vegetable soup, most of a loaf of bread and a jar of jam, as well as the chocolate cake. That sounds like gluttony, but a day or 2 of short rations on a strenuous trip creates a mighty hunger. It's undereating that can be serious. Next morning, I reached and followed a dirt road paralleling the parkway. A man in a station wagon stopped to offer a lift and was definitely antagonised by my refusal. Then a school bus came by and some of the riders waved from open windows while others hung out to stare. This road soon intercepted the parkway, which I followed to Humpback Mountain Overlook. A young couple was sitting in a car there, giving the impression they were honeymooners. The man said, "Howdy," so I stopped to talk. Mention of the trail brought on a discussion as to the proper pronunciation of Appalachian. The lady, who spoke with a deep South accent, used the pronunciation derived from the Appalachian Indian tribe, the original source. The man, definitely a northerner, said she would think so, coming from the South where they always mess up the language. I agreed with her, but didn't say so. That pesky rain was falling again by the time the lone expedition was approaching Rockfish Gap, at the southern end of the Shenandoah National Park. A government car stopped and the driver looked over at me, hunchbacked under my dripping poncho and rain hat, then offered a ride. My refusal brought a quiet question. What's the story? He was G.Y. Carpenter, an engineer on the Parkway project and a personal friend of Ross Hersey, editor of the News Virginian in Waynesboro. He said that Ross was very keen about such things and surely would be happy to see me. Since Waynesboro had been designated as a mailing point, I said I would think about it. He said he would call Mr. Hersey in the meantime. My camp that night was by a spring below the Parkway with a poncho shelter and fire for drying purposes. In the morning, I hid the pack in some blueberry bushes near the Parkway beyond Rockfish Gap, then hitched a ride into town. The girl at the post office handed me some letters, the first received on the trip, then said, "Mr. Hersey called and said to come right over." Says I to myself, why not? Mr. Hersey acted something like a kid on a picnic and afterward detailed photographer Bill Allwood to drive me back to Rockfish Gap and take pictures there. The resulting article and a picture appeared the following day on the front page of the News Virginian.